Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking Sopranos. We are your hosts, Harry Cottle and Ethan O'Brien, and we are back to talk about the final season of The Sopranos. It's been a long time in coming, and we finally got around to doing it somehow before the end of The Wire. But we are here and we are ready to talk about it.
Well, we finished The Wire months ago as well. You've left that point out that we've been ready to record The Wire for months, but at least you finished The Sopranos more recently.
Well, I think it's February now, mid-February, and I think I finished watching The Wire last September. So we really should have recorded that by now, but we haven't. We're here instead recording The Sopranos because I think it's more in our recent memory, and it's not just because I finished watching the show more recently. It's because I've been watching older episodes of the show again. I've been watching clips on YouTube. Been buying Sopranos posters. I'm just consuming a lot of Sopranos content at the moment, so I think it's more on our minds than The Wire is, which feels like it was a much longer time ago.
Yeah, definitely. So we're doing The Sopranos series season 6.
Yep, which was released in two halves. The first in 2006 and then the last in 2007. They had about a year's break in between, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a 2-year gap, and then they came out with two almost like two mini seasons together that together create a season 6.
Yeah, so the first half of season 6, you'll often hear it's called 6A, is the first 12 episodes. And then 6B, which came out later on the next year, consists of the last, I want to say 9 episodes. I think it's 9 episodes, from 13 to 21. Yeah, and that's how the show concludes. So I guess we should probably start talking about it.
Alright, if we're working our way through chronologically, season 6 gets off to a really good start. Like every or most seasons of The Sopranos, it opens with like a montage that kind of informs you of what the characters are doing. Maybe one of the stronger montages, I think. And you have a strange point of view character. It's kind of just one of the kind of goons, I guess, one of the kind of supporting characters. You suddenly get like an interior look into his life as he wants to move away from the organization, which is a unique approach to take.
It is, and it's interesting to see that all of these guys who kind of work with Tony, the ones who you don't really get an inside look into their life, are struggling with the same problems that ordinary people would. I mean, sure, Eugene is his name, Eugene Pontecorvo, is trying to retire to Florida with his family. And most people aren't in the mafia, so most people would just be able to do that if they had the money. But he still has very kind of, normal, general family-based problems that you'd expect most people to have. And it's another one of the things that The Sopranos does so well. It's always done it brilliantly with Tony, where the show balances his mob life with the life of just being a dad who does dad things. Eugene has a similar thing where he just seems like an ordinary American who happens to be in the mob.
Yeah, and it does the great thing of by kind of putting the audience through a different character's point of view. It allows you to see characters like Sylvia and Paulie like in a different context. Like they are kind of funny, entertaining guys, but when you're seeing it from someone else's perspective and they're your boss that kind of preventing you from going away, you kind of, I guess you see that more sinister side of them. It's definitely an interesting way to start the season.
Yeah, and it's slightly tragic as well, especially the way that it comes to a conclusion, because the entire episode basically takes this point of view character that you really catches you off guard, and then concludes it in the span of one episode. It's very much a self-contained idea, because it ends with him committing suicide, and it's not just the fact that he's not allowed to retire with his family. It's also that he's an FBI informant. We find out that he's been working for the FBI, I think maybe in the second or third last scene of the episode. and you start to realize just how hectic this guy's life is. There's a lot of pressure on him. He wants to move. He's working with the FBI. There's all sorts of problems going on in his life, so it's hardly surprising. But I think when that scene happened, my immediate reaction afterwards was just, you could have maybe done that a little bit. Again, they kind of blundettoed it a little bit. I thought it was a really neat idea to basically tell this story in the span of one episode. Normally, I really like that with The Sopranos. I like it when they try and go for something like College, where they basically take quite a unique concept or quite a unique set of characters and pretty much develop them in the span of an episode with little interference from out from external forces and things. But I think in this case, I liked what they were doing, but it's up until that final scene where I thought, you have an opportunity here. You've basically set up this character, and he's working with the FBI, and his life does look pretty shit. And the life that he has with his family isn't particularly great either. You get the impression that his relationship with his son isn't amazing. You can definitely see that Eugene has a lot of problems of having a very very short temper, and I just think the show had could have done something more. You could end with him still killing himself, but have it occur over a couple more episodes, because I like the fact that they made us grow attached to this one character that we'd seen a couple of times before in the background. Um, but develop him a little bit more. Try and get us to attach to him even more, so that when his end does inevitably come, it has that much more of an impact.
Yeah, and I think that leads us really kind of nicely onto what happens at the very end of the first episode,
Sure, sure.
which is Junior kind of in a kind of dementia haze, confusedly shoots Tony, which leads to the best example of a storyline carrying on across episodes. We've talked so much on this podcast about the episodic nature of the show and how self-contained it is in terms of wrapping up a narrative in 50 minutes, and think like things with Blundetto wrapping up a storyline across a season. But I think a big strength of the 6A 6B approach is I think they had an ending in mind, and from episode one they're planting the seeds for the final scene of the show. And also just
Definitely.
the strength that a lot of other shows have, a cliffhanger ending. When I watched the first episode and Tony got shot, I had to see what would happen next. And the next two episodes are really great because it's bringing the characters all together in a scenario in the hospital, and also the dream stuff, which we should talk about, because I think it's
Definitely.
pretty my favorite dream stuff in The Sopranos. It's very kind of strange and unconnected, and obviously it goes across a couple of episodes. But yeah, I think it's a really captivating, exciting start, first episode back, and the way it kind of leads into, I mean, not only the first two episodes where Tony's in a coma, but the next two episodes he's in a coma, but all of the recovery, and it takes, you feel the kind of weight of it. Like, it doesn't just rush back and Tony's back to business. It takes him a good few episodes to start walking again. He has that driver. It,
Oh God.
it really does. It really does dictate a lot of it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. Um, I think with these two episodes, the strongest stuff for me is not only seeing the strength of the community that comes to support Tony in his fight for survival. I mean, literally everyone has come. His sisters, obviously his family, his entire crew. They kind of spend a good couple of episodes in the hospital. Um, and it's at the end of the third episode that Tony becomes conscious,
Yeah,
regains his consciousness again. He does spend two episodes in this very strange dream state where he's kind of. It does kind of make sense in hindsight, because when he comes out of the coma, he has a new sort of more ingrained worldview, where he realizes how sacred life is. It's so easy for it to be gone, and I think that gives him a new perspective. It makes him appreciate more the parts of his life, and that works with him kind of having, I guess, kind of like an identity crisis in his dreams,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
he's basically at some kind of conference, staying at a hotel, right? And everyone is I'm trying to remember the best that I can, but the idea is that I think he has the suitcase or the luggage of someone who isn't him. I can't remember the name of the person, but everyone thinks that he's this guy,
Is it
don't they?
Kevin Finity? Is that his name?
Kevin Finity, yeah, Kevin Finity. That's right. And as the two episodes develop of him being in the hospital, he comes to this realization that he actually might be Kevin Finity. And it's really really cool. And also James Gandolfini doesn't have his accent, does he? He's
Wait,
he's just it's just the James
yeah, yeah.
Gandolfini
He's
voice.
doing the James Gandolfini voice, which sounds
Yeah,
so
yeah,
weird
yeah.
whenever you hear him
It it
interviewed.
does. It really does. Because obviously the voice that he's putting on in the show is a New Jersey inflected accent. Um, but yeah, no, it's really really cool, and it goes to show how great the show is at doing dream sequences that when they don't feel the need to ham in some very very obvious point, and it's more about just wondering what's going on, what the symbolism is, what the hidden meaning of it is all. Um, and it's only really in hindsight, as he wakes up from a coma, that you understand the turmoil that was going on in his head. I think the show does that really well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about test stream on the previous podcast, and obviously that was a big thing.
Yeah.
An episode that's mostly a dream, but you need it, like you need Funhouse, because something needs to come out of the character's subconscious, and you need to bring a lot of the anxieties to kind of present them to the audience in a way that's not just him telling Melfi how he's feeling.
Yeah.
But I think
But
this
the
is
the the,
this
the other yeah, sorry, yeah, you
okay.
go.
I was gonna say this is so bold because it's not only it's across two episodes, but I think it's very vague. It kind of is going nowhere for a long time, and I hate to keep bringing him up, but it is like Lynch, you know. It is it's kind of it's a weird story of kind of non sequiturs and like kind of strange comedy moments with a weird tone. He's kind of trapped in this nowhere space, and you have this fantastic
Mm.
final scene where it's about going into a house, and it's very clearly kind of a metaphor for the afterlife or death, where it's a big party with full of familiar faces, where Steve Buscemi is going to kind of see him in. I think it's a
Yeah,
fantastic piece of acting, this kind of
definitely.
realization and rejection of it. It's a moment that BoJack Horseman has just ripped off entirely in the penultimate episode of that show. Um, but yeah, I
No,
really I like the combination of that a lot. And just quickly, also, I like the real world stuff. Obviously, everyone coming together. Season 5 was the least favorite season for me, largely because you have Carmela and Tony apart, and they do come together by the end of it, but it feels kind of shaky. I think this does a really good job of like showing you how much Carmela cares about Tony, and then after it, you totally believe that they will just kind of be together forever because of going through this experience. I think it's a fantastic 2 episodes for Edie Falco. Like she just looks tired, and she looks like she's kind of dealing with so much. And I think that and the dream stuff really kept me hooked for these series of episodes.
Yeah, definitely. I will talk about how good Edie is in these two episodes here. But I do also want to go back to the dream stuff really quickly. I wanted to say two things. First off, I completely agree with you. That scene where he's outside this big house and there's this kind of strange glow from inside the building where there's some seemingly really nice party going on, and Steve Buscemi's outside and says, "You know what? All you have to do is go in and say hi. Give me your suitcase." And James Gandolfini, there's like an anxiety behind his performance in that scene. He doesn't want to give the suitcase. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. I guess hand over his emotional burdens. I guess, or something along those lines. He doesn't want to give away who he is. He wants to carry on fighting. He doesn't. There's something stopping him from going inside the house. He doesn't know what it is, but he just has this feeling. Meanwhile, his dead brother, obviously, sorry, his dead cousin, is the one who is telling him to come join him, basically. And the entire scene gave me goosebumps. It was really quite like I'd never felt like he was going to die, but it still left me feeling, yeah, feeling anxious. I think is the best way to describe it. Feeling anxious for for what's going on, for Tony basically being beckoned to come into this house and he clearly doesn't want to go in, and just the way that it's shot and the way that it's all put together. I think puts you on edge a little bit, and that's what I really like. But also going back to the main dream stuff in these two episodes, I think as far as the context of the rest of the show goes, it's probably the most grounded dreams there is. Right. I
Mm,
mean, I guess
yeah.
the big difference is that he's not really asleep; he's in a coma. And I don't know how that plays into it, but I do know that it feels like it still has a strange logic to it, and obviously being stuck with someone else's belongings that aren't your own is a strange situation to find yourself in. But it's not an impossible situation. However, in the rest of the show, when you have dream sequences, they've always been extremely creative. I think they've always been really great at showing how dream logic works. It's strange. It doesn't make sense. Characters seemingly hop all over the place. And you find yourself in these very surreal and absurd situations. And I think you mentioned Funhouse. I recently rewatched Funhouse because it's one of my favorite episodes of the show. And the dream sequences in that, when Tony is realizing more and more, okay, you know, Sal is going to be a bit of a problem. He has to do something about him, and how those dreams basically push him to make that realization are so, they're just so creatively constructed. That's what I really appreciate about the dreams in The Sopranos. They're always maybe not as creative as a Lynchian dream or a Lynchian setting, but there is definitely something very. It's weird to say authentic about dreams because dreams are so weird and just don't really make much sense. But there is an authenticity to how they portray dreams in the show that I've always really liked. I mean, as well that one part where 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 Silvio's doing an Al Pacino impression in the red cardigan, and he's almost on a conveyor belt as he's walking past, and it's just it's very very strange and doesn't make sense, but it's also not an impossible. It's almost not a I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. But in these two episodes, it is strange that there's almost a very kind of a very tangible plot to follow, isn't there? It's not just images for the sake of images. There is some journey that Tony goes on that could happen in the real world, conceivably. Is what I'm trying to say, and I like that. I think that's a very good contrast to the dreams earlier on in the show.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it feels like the first bit of Mulholland Drive, where it's like this kind of plot that isn't really
Yeah.
existing, but it also kind of is.
Yeah. And you are right. I mean, Carmela kind of has to hold the ship together, doesn't she? In these couple of episodes, AJ's acting out a little bit,
Yeah, he's at his
not really
worst.
taking. I yeah, yeah, sure. He's very irritating, but at the same time, I think what the real strength of his character in these two episodes is the scene where he has with his dad alone, right? Where you realise that the way that he's been dealing with all this has just been a very, very shielding facade that he's put up, trying to act like it. He's clearly affected, but he doesn't want to act like it bothers him that much. Like he I think he wants to put on this kind of image of, I know my dad's going to survive this, but deep down, I think he's a lot more scared than he actually lets on, and it just makes for great AJ content that this season has a literal ton of. And it comes out in that one scene where it's just him in a room with his dad, and I think someone peeks in. It might be calm. It probably is calm. To see AJ weeping in front of his dad who's still unconscious. Um, so yeah, it is good, and we won't go on. We've already talked quite a lot about these couple of episodes, so I won't say too much more. But I also quite like the stuff about Silvio being acting boss and not being able to
Oh
cope
yeah,
with it at all.
that's really
That's
funny
very
because
funny. Yeah,
Sylvia's not really a character in the sense that you don't ever get his interior world. It's the first time we kind of see the inside of his home and his life with his wife, and it's great that it just takes him out. It's Silvio was a born consigliere, He was tailor made to be a number two, and you just realize that he could never be a boss. He isn't cut out for it. I think
Yeah,
that's pretty funny. I also like the Vito, because Vito is going to be a pretty big character, and
yeah,
they do it. I think these first few episodes do a good job of like giving him more to do, and you understand he's like really ambitious and kind of wants to be the boss, but is willing to kind of suck up to people to do that. So I think
definitely,
it does a good
definitely.
job of making Vito kind of a more prominent player. Definitely, I think that stuff's really good. The stuff that
Yeah,
I'm not the biggest fan of is as much as I find Paulie really funny, the kind of plot line that happens kind of around this time, where it turns out his mother isn't his real mother. That stuff, I don't know, it didn't really work for me. Um,
oh, that's interesting because I like that because again, I think with Tony's crew, apart from Christopher, who always has been given a lot of, emotional problems, you don't really get much of a sense of what ails them. I mean, sure, you can make comments about their flaws and their weaknesses, and of course, Paulie, Silvio, Bobby as well, maybe they do have them. But I think to give Paulie this kind of issue where he finds out his mum isn't his real mum, it might be a bit sensationalized, sure. Um, but I do like it. I do like it. I don't think the show has. I mean, for Silvio, it's always like you said. It's always been a huge lack of. But I think with all those kind of characters, if there was one thing I would change about The Sopranos, a lot of it. Well, there's a lot of changes I would make, but a big one would be to give the members of Tony's crew to give the audience more insight into the emotional problems that are going on in their life, and that's why I like that. Um, but yeah, going back to Silvio being acting boss, I think it just you're right. It goes to show how much of a born number two he was meant to play. And throughout the entire show, you're constantly just questioning why would anyone ever want to be a mob boss? You basically painted a target on your back. It has to be the most pressurizing job of all time. You constantly have to look over your shoulder because the FBI might be at your door, someone might be out to kill you. And even though he doesn't have to be acting boss for a particularly long time, I think just, being the one who has that executive decision just gets to him so much, doesn't he? And the way that it culminates is the really hilarious part of it, where he ends up in the hospital as well, suffering some kind of a panic attack, right? So should we carry on talking about the next couple of episodes? I also do want to say the Bobby subplot where
oh, that's
he
awful.
shoots that rapper in. Yeah, it's pretty bad because it's pretty bad because I just don't ever believe Bobby would ever come up with that kind of idea. Full stop. I think he's far too much of a level-headed, nice guy to even consider shooting someone, uh, just so that they can become a more prominent rap artist. I don't believe that at all. But I don't mind it because I think again the way that it culminates is so funny. That one scene where he shoots the guy and shoots him in his ass when he meant to shoot him sort of on the upper part of his leg, I think is it's so funny. It's so funny.
And what did work for me though, I know, is the wedding episode, which
Mm.
is next, and I think it's definitely a thing that I guess hangs over it. Obviously, they bring up the Godfather a lot, and doing like a big mob kind of Italian style wedding is a big thing, and but there's definitely pressure, and obviously it's hard to film because you have to get everyone together. So that might be why they took so long to finally do one. But I think it's a really fantastic episode. You kind of get more of Johnny Sack, who since
Yeah,
he's been in prison, has kind of mellowed, and I like all the stuff with him and his daughter Christina
definitely,
Melotti.
definitely.
Um, but yeah, I think the wedding scene is fantastic. That you have Tony kind of he's got things to achieve, and you're kind of following him around, as he's kind of socializing with his family and kind of talking to his mafia family, which has always been the kind of central dichotomy which makes The Sopranos what it is. You also have him kind of recovering, and the subplot with his Jack's driver, which is it is I kind of like it. I think it's kind of obvious what they're doing at the end, but it kind of shows like an insecurity and like a this kind of strength that he has to project. And the entire episode at the wedding is kind of about that, with Johnny Sack getting arrested and Phil Leotardo kind of being so embarrassed because he cried, and just this kind
Yeah,
of this idea
yeah.
of like weakness and projected masculinity. I think is it might not be the best done, but I think it's a really interesting theme, and it's just a great
I
episode.
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, if there's one thing The Sopranos does so well above everything is just show you what it means to be Tony Soprano. I mean, in 6 seasons, they do an insane amount to give you a very, very deep look into this character, and I completely agree with you. I think the execution is pretty poor, um, because of just how it. The way that they build up to it, I think, is kind of poor, not subtle, and I also think that I just think that what it ends up with is it's just completely unrealistic. Because basically what happens is Tony kind of puts himself in a situation that's completely unfounded to be able to punch his driver, who's clearly a lot stronger than him. And I like the implication of it because you hear a little bit about it when he talks about how this entire situation being in the hospital, he's hated. And obviously you would, but one of the big reasons for that is the fact that he feels like it's a sign of weakness. He feels like now that people have seen just how close to death he can be, just how um, easy it is for him to be weak into such a position, people will take advantage of that. So he has to now project an idea of him not having lost that weakness. He's still the strong guy he was before he went into the hospital. And I completely agree with you. I think it is all about masculinity, and I think that as a theme is it works so well. It's just the execution of it. I mean, it's a scene that if I wasn't watching it with my parents, if I was watching it by myself, I would be laughing. I mean, it's so ridiculous. He just uh, he just punches this guy out of nowhere, and the reason that he punches him, well, I mean, the real reason is, of course, the reason I just described, but the fake reason is that he put his hand on a fridge, or something like that. It's something so trivial, and then the way that Tony reacts to it is, I just want to laugh. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's I guess it is an execution, and the Sopranos thing of like wanting to wrap up its episode with like a theme, so it kind of rushes stuff. Um,
Yeah.
I think it is interesting because tying into this, you also have Vito, who we know is gay because you see him sucking some guy off like a few seasons ago, but it kind of drops
Mhm.
that. But unlike The Wire, it actually pays off. You never find out anything about rules. But in this one, he goes to a gay club because you can see his kind of like how alienated he feels at the wedding, and someone sees him there, and suddenly it is this clash of the worlds. If the episode's about like having to project strength and kind of masculinity, then suddenly someone kind of being discovered, someone who is ambitious and is kind of a crucial part of this kind of mob organization, being gay and being discovered to be gay, and it's going to lead to a subplot which is one of the strengths of season 6 as a whole, and I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think I think the way that he kind of gets caught out is the best way of handling that as a topic where it's something just as simple as he went to a gay bar and he was spotted by some guys making their deliveries, or going to get protection money, or something like that. and that's when he basically shits himself. And there's this really funny scene where he calls up Silvio, and it's like 3 a.m. and he has no reason to call Silvio, and Silvio says, "What's up?" and he just says, "Is everything okay between us?" and Silvio says, "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" And then Vito just hangs up, and Silvio is just like the look on his face, that very very stereotypical Silvio expression is just it's brilliant. And then of course he has to go to the run. I think he goes somewhere in Maine, which is further up north in the upper right part of the US to kind of hide out for a second, and then the characters slowly start to piece together what's happened when I think it's Christopher runs into some guy who heard from someone that Vito was spotted in a gay bar in New York. Um, and when it comes to the Vito stuff of that subplot, where it's his life trying to escape the world and his eventual return to that world because he realizes he can't function without it. This isn't the life he was meant to lead. Is brilliant. It's just fantastic. But I think the way that it's handled back at home in New Jersey, I like for the part most of it, but I think it does. I think there is one too many scenes of characters just talking about Vito in a really really insulting way, and I think the scenes that work for me are the ones like where they bring in Meadows' boyfriend, to talk about what he saw last season, and scenes like that work, and of course the scenes where they just find out about Vito full stop, and originally none of them believe it at first, but then they start to realize that there's overwhelming evidence that he is gay. But I think there's one scene of Phil Leotardo too much where he's just being homophobic. And I
Mm.
think you could cut that out. Maybe we know we know Phil's stance on gay people. I don't have to have yet another scene of him saying it for pretty much no other reason. Um, I guess. I guess Winters and Chase wanted to hammer home the point that it's just not something that's quote unquote appropriate in their lifestyle. I also think before we talk about like the Vito stuff as a whole, I do want to just say I think the way that they show um, Tony's point of view about it is really good. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like you can split it into two halves where you have the stuff as a whole and obviously everyone's reaction to it. And I think it highlights a really interesting kind of point where like it's very clear that like Tony doesn't really give a shit. Um, like he doesn't care. Um,
Yeah.
like he may pretend to care, but he doesn't. And I think the show does a really good job of presenting. Like I don't like you can't accuse the show of being homophobic. I think some of the characters are for sure, and you can see like people who are more traditional, more conservative, and are kind of old school, like Paulie and obviously Frank Vincent's character Leotardo, and
Hmm.
how offended they are versus Bacala, who is the audience stand-in as a good guy, you know. He doesn't mind, you know. And I think it's interesting. And but okay, so Tony, he doesn't really care, but he also kind of has to pretend he does. It's this kind of performative strength and masculinity, and they have to stand for kind of the old world and like. But
Mm.
I think one of the great things about The Sopranos is how far removed we are from this kind of Italian generation that had to do this. These are criminals, and this is about greed. And this idea that it's about family and loyalty and honor and these old traditions is just a joke. You know, these are suburban New Jersey guys who were raised more by the Godfather than their own
Yeah,
fathers. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I think it's great that like this kind of having to pretend that this is this big thing when you can just see like I think it's performed really well. Like the Tony doesn't care that much. You know, what all he cares about really is kind of his money. And like Vito is loyal and he's in the same way that Ralph was a problem because he was a villain. Vito is kind of, but he kept Ralph around because of money. It's kind of the same with Vito. He cares more about the money than any sense of kind of I guess traditions. Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah.
I think it's an
And
interesting scenario as well for the show. Like we always have villains, and we have Phil Leotardo as the villain, but instead of it being the problem of Tony has someone in his organization that's trying to kill him, he has this. It's an entirely unique scenario for the show, which is great. It develops over a lot of episodes, which again is great. The way it's kind of slowly uncovered. And talking about Vito's kind of plan, it's great. You know, he gets away. You're definitely rooting for him to get away, and no one would ever find him. It's the fact that he has to come back, which again is a very interesting thing
Yeah,
about his
yeah.
character.
There's one really brilliant scene where I can't quite remember how Vito came to lose his phone in the first place, but it's on the side of a road, and Tony calls the phone, and he actually gets, I think, someone on the receiving end for the first time when he's tried to call Vito constantly, and it's just some construction guy by the side of the road working, and of course Tony has to just act like a bit of a prick instead of staying a bit calm and actually asking, "Hey, do you know whose phones belong to?" He has to get aggressive from the get go, and it's a really funny exchange because at the end of it, what happens is I think Tony like demands, "Oh, you tell me where you are right now," or something like that, and the guy says, "Yeah, yeah, sure, just hold still 1 minute," and he chucks the phone onto the other side of the road where a massive like lorry is about to crush it or something like that, and I just remember thinking, God, that is the best outcome Vito could have ever had from that entire situation because if Tony had had some idea of the kind of area that Vito was in, that could have been the end of him. Well, I say that. But one thing I do want to mention before we talk more about the Vito stuff, I want to go back to Tony for a second, and I actually want to comment on how I think his performance is fantastic in how he deals with the Vito, with the revelations about Vito, because I think you are definitely right when you say he doesn't really care. And there is one scene where he's talking to, I think, Jennifer, and he says that. Well, he kind of it takes a second for him to say it first because with Tony, obviously, there's more complex emotions at play, and he can't just willingly admit, okay, I don't care. There has to be you got to break him down a little bit first. But he does end up saying, I don't care. And I think the way that he delivers that around his crew is really good because whenever people ask him for his opinion on it, he always replies by saying, "Well, he's one of my top earners," um, and I think it's cool that he's not willing to outrightly condemn Vito straight away. There's more of an internal kind of conflict going on there, where his crew and Phil have the opinion that they should just completely outcast this guy, and if they find him, kill him. Um, and then there's also the fact that it just doesn't really matter in the first place. And I think that how Gandolfini portrays that in his kind of exchanges and conversations with people really comes through. You definitely see in a way that I don't think is heavy-handed at all that he doesn't care, and he always tries to justify it by saying, "Well, he's one of my top earners, and that's the reason that he gives." But I think there's more to it. I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, it's not such a big issue for him. I mean, maybe that's not true. And maybe for him it is just about the money. But I like to think that he's developed a little bit since his racist days from season 3 where he hated Meadow's boyfriend for no reason. And I also like to think that with his recent stint in the hospital, that and his new kind of world outlook, that to me was a new side of Tony Soprano, one that just doesn't outrightly condemn someone because of their lifestyle choices. He's a bit more open minded than the kind of person that he was before the start of season 6. I don't know if you think if you think that's correct or not, but I think Gandolfini's really great.
There's a lot of scenes of him trying to be a better person, for sure.
Mm.
And I think that's definitely an interesting aspect in the whole thing, especially kind of in 6A. So kind of talking about the other side of it and Vito actually going away, I think it's good because I don't know, it could be cliche, it could be boring, but I think they do a good job of keeping it captivating. I think he's a very well defined character. He could very easily have just been like, oh, his entire character is that he's gay, which I think happens quite a lot with kind of, I guess, characters that you could almost say like gimmicks, like, oh, we're going to make a point
Sure.
about like race, or we're gonna have the black character, or we're gonna have Yo. But he is very well defined, and I think his love interest is very well defined as well. It'd be easy to kind of, he feels like a real person who actually has like a life and things going on, and they have a lot of arguments, and they don't kind of click. They have something, but it's not like, I don't know. It doesn't feel cliche. I think they have a genuinely like good chemistry and connection, and I like that Vito is kind of a loser. Like he's good at he's a good criminal. Like he's good at one thing, and outside of that bubble, he can't kind of live a normal suburban life. And I think that's really interesting. The way he kind of has to come back, because he kind of has to he has to be in that world. You know, he kind of doesn't know anything else. I think it's a really interesting way of taking it, and you are totally rooting for him to kind of get away, because you're like, oh, if he comes back, the mob will kill him. But it does a good job of like, by when in the process of coming back, he kills him as a person. You're reminded like, oh yeah, this guy's a fucking criminal. You know, this guy's a murderer.
Yeah.
This guy killed Jackie Jr.
Yeah.
You know, I disliked him, and now I like him, and now I don't like him again.
Yeah. No, the show definitely plays with your expectations and emotions quite a lot in that capacity. I would agree. I also think that another really strong part of the Vito stuff in this season is that when he goes to, it's not Maine, by the way, it's New Hampshire. When he goes to New Hampshire and tries to kind of, I don't know the plan that he has in his mind, but I think from the way that he acts, he definitely, even though he hasn't fully committed to it yet, I think he definitely goes there with the plan to settle and try and create a new life for himself. And I think that there's an active part of him represses his sexual orientation when he arrives, and you definitely see that in the scenes with the other man. I can't remember his name at all. Where they seem to have a really great connection, and they spend time together, and they get along really well. But then when it feels like something is actually going to happen, Vito just punches him, and I think part of me wants to say that the reason is because he kind of blames his own orientation for the reason that he was forced to leave in the first place, and he thinks that that might be a problem for him here. So he actively tries to fight against it. Maybe that's not right, and I'm just reading it into
Yeah, I
it
think
too
he has
much.
like an internalized homophobia from kind of growing up in
Yeah,
such a homophobic environment.
yeah, exactly, and I think it really comes through in those scenes. I think he really, part of him really does blame that side of him for why he had to leave the life, when really it's just the fact that the people that he works with are just really intolerant, and that's the actual issue. But I think scenes like that really go to show the internal thinking that goes on in Vito's head, and adds to what you said, which is that he's a well defined character. He's not just the token gay character in The Sopranos who has to leave because we have to make a point about how all these characters are just the worst. There's definitely more to it than just the point. It is a storyline about a character that develops the show.
Yeah, and it really does develop, because it becomes a central conflict about him coming back, and
Yeah,
then what do we do with
yeah,
him?
yeah.
And like, I think you said there's one too many scenes of Phil, but I think what makes Phil such a good Sopranos villain, not only that he's a nasty piece of shit played by Frank Vincent, but like all good villains, they 100% think they're the good guy. Season
Mm,
5, you have him losing his brother, and we'll talk about Chicken Town for sure. But you can see how much that hurt him, and the fact that he never really got the revenge against Blundetto that he wanted. Um, and you can kind of, he definitely feels that he's been wronged. Um, and then he's like very traditional. He's very conservative, and you kind of see you see his family a lot, and you see how, because he was related to Vito's wife maybe, or he's definitely got some relation. Him kind of being gay and leaving his family is like feels like a personal attack to Frank Vincent, and an attack to his character. And then his relationship with like Vito's son, which is covered in an episode. All of that
mm,
stuff is you can see how like Frank Vincent thinks he's been wronged and thinks he's totally in the right, even though like as the audience you're always against him. And I think the fact that he's so convinced that everything he's doing is right, and you can kind of see his point of view, even though you completely disagree with it. I think makes him such a captivating villain as we head
Yeah,
later into the season, where it kind of brings up the tension that you're like, oh, there's something's going to kick off it. This show is going to end with a war between New York and New Jersey because of this.
yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with you. And I think another really, I think another one of the most villainous traits Phil has is how two-faced he is. I mean, he's so just. There are so many points in this season, I think, more than the fifth one, where there's such a hypocrisy to that character that I think works so well in just the way that he's written. Where in the first few episodes of this season, he has dinner with Vito. They're clearly good friends. They have a good relationship, and you know he respects Vito, and he even makes the case that Vito should be in charge if Tony was to pass. But the second this comes out, it's like he forgets that there's a friendship beneath that. That this is something that just completely um, demoralizes Vito completely. And it's that two-faced nature that he has that works so well. And he also has it with Johnny Sacks as well, where all the time he's a very loyal Johnny Sacks guy. He's always been on his side about everything. But then the second he cries at his own daughter's wedding because he gets taken away by the FBI at the last second, he criticizes him for crying. And then when Johnny Sacks later admits to being part of the, maybe it's already happened at this point, when Johnny Sack admits to being part of an organized crime, he denounces him for it, and it's like he's just a very duplicitous character, isn't he? In his
Yeah,
interactions with people and the people that he's supposed to be close to, the people that he's supposed to support and be with. It's like it all goes out the window the second something doesn't slightly align with his views on what well their thing, quote unquote, is.
but he has a clear kind of sense of like internal morality, and if anything kind of for him crosses a line, then he's gonna like lash out. And I think a lot of that is I mean, Chickentown is like a perfect summation of everything, and it's such a great moment because of it. But it's because he's been away for so long that he didn't crack. He went away pretty much for like 20 years or whatever. Like a
Mm.
large chunk of his life was taken away, and he did the time, because he thought that was the right thing to do.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
yeah.
people from this old world that he's part of, this mafioso kind of thing, do. And now he's come back and things are changing, and any kind of slight thing that goes against him suddenly feels so much worse because he's done the time and he kind of expects to be treated like a king because of it. But it kind of just makes everything that happens with Phil that much more potent. And as you say,
Yeah,
it kind of builds and builds until like it kind of explodes in a really satisfying way.
no, yeah. I definitely think you're absolutely right about that, and it just adds to what you said about him being a character that you can dislike, but whose point of view gets across. And there is even a little bit of pity there, a small ounce of it, where you do see him as someone who has done time for 20 years, and when he comes out, he expects people to do the same things that he does because it's about the respect that you show other people, and when people don't do what he has suffered to basically keep alive, it probably hurts him, and I'm sure it does go against his ideals quite a lot. And again, it goes to show another one of the classic Sopranos themes that Tony was talking about even in the first episode of the show, which is about how their things have changed. I mean, when people watch The Godfather, they think about how the mafia is just loyalty, right? You go away and you put the Cosa Nostra first above everything, and to now I guess live in some world where they think it wasn't always like this. I'm sure it always was, but to feel like things are different and people don't have quite the same I guess the same respect or the same approach to their thing as they would want them to have, mixed in with the fact that it's just a very violent business to be in, full stop. It probably does add to Phil's angst about the way that people act. It's like you said. Some people are more conservative than others. Some people hold what people have been doing for a lot longer to be how things should stay. They don't like change, and even Tony is like that in some respects. People don't do the time anymore. They flip for a reduced sentence, and it's things like that that I think you're right. Probably do get to Phil. The lack of respect that he feels he should be shown. Um, and again, it does become a really big catalyst later on even though the episode's not called Chicken Town, we are going to call it Chicken Town.
Some other kind of character stuff and plots and episodes from this season. There's Junior. Obviously, after shooting Tony, he kind of goes away and has his own One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of experience in his nursing home. I think that stuff's really sad. Junior was one of the kind of funniest and most entertaining characters of the show. Started as a real threat, and I think his stuff is really strong. Like I say, it's very sad. It's still entertaining, obviously, because it's Junior. We've got that, and another character, Christopher. Obviously, our sympathies are going to be against him because of the end of season 5 and the kind of choice he makes with Adriana. But I think they do a good job of giving him Cleaver, which is like a very funny, entertaining kind of thing. Subplot, so you're not kind of watching Christopher in too many kind of heavy dramatic scenes, although they come in as 6B kicks in. You have the whole Cleaver thing, which is a really entertaining, funny luxury lounge. Is one of the kind of great comedy episodes of the show with the incredibly underrated little Carmine, who now he's away from the main plot, we can kind of enjoy as just a really funny comedy character that thinks he's a genius, but is just very stupid. So I think Cleaver all of that stuff is hilarious, and I think the Junior stuff is strong as well. What do you think about these kind of two character bits?
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. I think the Cleaver stuff from season 6 is really good. Like you said, it is great to have something where things seem to be getting gloomier and gloomier by the episode. Um, it is nice to have this subplot that's just a lot of fun. And the episode that separates the episodes where Vito is is in New Hampshire trying to fix himself up a new life. Um, is the episode where Christopher goes to actually, is it? Yeah, it is, yeah. I think yeah, it is, sorry. So what separates the V2 episodes into two kind of more halves is the episode where Artie's business is going down the toilet because of a new restaurant that's opened soon, and that's the worst half of a generally good episode, which is where Christopher and little Carmine have to go and talk to Ben Kingsley about working on their film, which is which is great. And I think in retrospect, I like that episode. But while I was watching it, I wasn't too keen on it because even though I am definitely pro episodes of The Sopranos where it's like, okay, we're just going to take a couple of characters and we'll give them a full episode. So we'll give Christopher half an episode and we'll give, well, presumably someone more interesting than Artie half an episode. But we'll do things kind of like that. I always love episodes of The Sopranos like that, where it's not trying to show you a little bit of what every character's doing. They just, take a couple and you follow them around for an hour. But what I don't like about this episode is that the Vito content is so compelling, but I have to watch an episode of Artie's usual stupidities to get to the resolution of
So
what's going
is
to
this the
happen.
one where they all start going to a different restaurant?
Yeah. It's the one where Artie's business is like I said, is going down the toilet because there's a restaurant that's open nearby, and he gets into a big argument with Benny, I want to say, who is the guy who sets up this scheme with credit cards with someone who works at Artie's restaurant, and it's just another episode where it's like, okay, well, it's fun, but at the same time, it is Artie. You basically the best stuff of this season so far. You're going to put on hiatus for a bit to show me what Artie's getting up to. When really, I just want to see how the Vito stuff develops. That's what I'm much more interested in. So to have that break with Artie, even though it does have some really good moments with Christopher and Ben Kingsley, it just feels like an episode that sucks the flow out of the show at that point. Not quite as badly as an episode from 6B, but still, I just think arty stuff in general. Like I could tell that with this episode, they basically said, okay, well we have 21 episodes. Artie isn't a character that we think is that great, but we normally give Artie an episode each season, so we should probably find one to give him in. And they looked for the best place to just copy and paste that episode into, and that's where it looked best. Of course, you got to make some adjustments so that it actually fits in with the timeline of things. Um, but still, I mean, what did you think of the episode? Do you not think that that to have this break and you basically stick around with Artie and his usual temper tantrums and his kind of erratic behaviour
Yeah, I mean,
sort of
Artie's.
ruins things a little bit.
I'm not the biggest fan. Like, I understand the idea behind the character, and I think it was probably more funny for the people making the show. Like, it's
Yeah,
probably a nice break for the writers, like to write Artie, because it goes from like the serious kind of drama to this kind of like wannabe gangster character.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, I think the writers are more in on the joke than I personally was. I think it's just like all the situations are so contrived with him, where it's like suddenly they have to develop this trait that he talks too much to resolve it in the episode, and suddenly this new restaurant comes out of nowhere and they never eat there again. Like it just feels like it was
Mm.
invented for the episode. It's like a Simpsons episode, where it's like everything's
Yeah, and
wrapped up so neatly and never is mentioned again. Uh,
exactly, exactly. And at the end of the day, who cares? So a new episode opens up next door. I mean, that's hardly, the deep level of drama that we're used to on the Sopranos. I mean, it's such a it's such a nothing kind of conflict generator. It just feels like all it does is it gives an excuse for Artie to be a bit miserable
Although,
for a bit.
speaking of like nothing generators, there is a fantastic episode which comes out of nothing. It's the ride, the episode with this kind of this Italian fair, and the conflict is that Paulie kind of skimps on paying the people that are doing it, and
Mm.
there's an accident which kind of I think it's Janice's daughter or one of Bobby's daughters, sorry, and she could have kind of I can't remember if she gets injured or could get injured, and then this causes like a big schism between those two, like a big argument, and everyone kind of turns on Paulie. And that's an episode where it's almost like a comedy thing, like it's very minor. It's not that dramatic in terms of the stakes, but I think that one works really well. Maybe it's just because it's better characters than than Artie getting involved in it.
Yeah, it is a good episode. I do think it is a good episode actually, and it's also an episode where Paulie discovers that he might have a really fatal illness, um, and I think it ends with a really great scene where he just I think goes to sit with his mum. Well, not his mum, his aunt technically. Um, but and the final shot is just kind of a lingering thing where you know um, that Paulie is going to find out soon about his illness, but you don't know the verdict. But in that one scene, without any dialogue, the way that he, basically goes to see someone that he said once with quite sincerity he would never ever see again, and he just kind of sits there, and the camera pans out of the window a little bit, and it's just fixated on those two, sat on a sofa watching the TV, and Paulie has this very very solemn look on his face. It's a great way to end the episode. Um, But in terms of the stuff that actually happens with the ride, I think it is good. I think it is good mostly because I quite like the procession that happens. That kind of carnival part of the episode is pretty fun, and there's also a really good Christopher montage where I can't remember how he got himself stuck in this situation in the first place, but he basically ends up taking some drugs with someone in a car, even though he was trying to resist. But obviously the temptation was a bit too much for him. And there's a good montage of him just walking around the fair while it's night time. Everything's boarded and closed up. No one's really around apart from a couple of people. And there are a couple of really good slow motion shots, and it's got a very contemplative mood. And it's just Christopher walking around smoking. There's clearly something on his mind. You can't really tell what it is. You presume it'll be something either related to the drugs he had taken or to do with Adriana. But again, I think I think it's a good part of the episode that also adds to stuff later on when things start to go a bit more haywire with him, and he kind of goes off the rails again a little bit. Um, but it is a good episode. It is a really good episode, and I think that's around the time where there are two other interesting things that happen. So the first is that Tony ends up becoming interested in a woman who he does a some business with to do with real estate, and Christopher ends up becoming involved with her at a later point, and it fuels some tension between the two. And I also know that around here is where AJ goes to visit Uncle June. You remember the scene?
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned it because I think that's a really fantastic scene. Obviously, early on in The Sopranos, like pop culture was a big part of the show. You know, the pilot's basically like a Scorsese kind of ripoff, and then the characters are kind of contextualized by their obsession with these like mafia movies, and the idea that AJ is kind of, I mean, his struggles are interesting anyway. That he's struggling with the same problems as his father is in terms of having anxiety attacks and like a
Mm.
kind of a weird like sense of identity, you know. And he is like rich and spoiled and annoying, but I mean that is the point they're going for. And the fact that it gets so caught up in this narrative, the narrative of his dad as this kind of figure that the media are covering, and like, oh, he was shot by his uncle, when we know the reality was that it was a total accident. And the fact that he tries to kill him, and then when he's kind of confronted about it, he talks about the scene in Godfather, you know, to which Tony's like, it's just a movie, you know. I think that stuff is really good. Um, yeah, and it's a kind of great moment for AJ. It's pretty much his rock bottom in 6A. I mean, he's gonna hit rock bottom in 6B, even worse.
Mm.
The kid can't catch a break. But I think after that, he kind of he meets that kind of woman, and he has like a good thing going there, even though it's a very strange relationship. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic scene that I had forgotten. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's one of the high points of those kinds of areas because it is. You're right. It's great drama, and the most striking part of it is when he calls out his dad by saying, "You're a massive hypocrite." Whenever we watch Godfather and Godfather 2, and Vito goes back to kill the people who killed his family. You say it's the best scene of all time. You sit there with your bowl of ice cream and say it's the best scene in the film. And you're right. It's again another great facet of The Sopranos to show how inside that world, the way that art and real life gets caught up in this constant comparison with each other, isn't it? Because
Mm.
it's always about, you know, to some characters the good old days where things were better. Now with with the new Rico statutes and all these other kind of problems, the mobs not on their way out, but it's not what it used to be. It doesn't have the same kind of sanctity that it used to have. And it's great. And The Godfather again, it's definitely a recurring film that people talk about as being an idealized version of what it means to be a mafioso. Um, and obviously AJ takes inspiration from it in trying to avenge his dad. He wants to do something for him. He wants to do something that he feels his dad will respect, and his only way to do that is to take inspiration from a fucking movie.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, but it is just a great scene by itself. It's really really tense. You don't know what's going to happen. You have some inkling that AJ is going to go and he's probably going to try and stab his own grandfather, which when you say out loud is kind of crazy. To think that's how the show that's how the show ended up. Um, but yeah, it's just really well shot, and in the scene where he is talking to his dad afterwards, and again, what James Gandolfini does so well is there's this roller coaster of emotions going on in a scene. You know, that the way that he feels and the way that he behaves will change. I mean, the kind of outlook and the way that he yes, so his outlook will be very different to how a scene starts to how a scene ends. He's such an oscillating character, and in that scene there are so many moments where he is so angry at his own son for thinking that this could possibly be a good idea and having to explain it to his mother. And then when his son has a chance to explain to himself, he becomes so much more empathetic, and he realizes that all his son was trying to do was something that he thought would impress him. Um, and the way that James Gandolfini brings that to his performance is always it's so enticing, so enticing.
Another kind of episode that I like, another very well acted sequence, I think, is Carmela going to Paris,
That's brilliant.
with
That's
Ro.
brilliant.
I really like that stuff. I think Ro's a character that we probably haven't talked about much on this podcast, but she's really important as a kind of a friend to Carmela, and also a person that's just been through so much. You know, like the show starts with her husband seriously ill, and he dies very very like soon into the show. And then obviously she loses the son as well, and she's kind of been through so much.
Yeah,
And I think it's great to kind of have them. First of all, the show going to Paris is like it's like a nice change of pace. Carmela getting away, and then having a scene together, and Carmela kind of trying to talk to her, and she's like, "You have no idea what I've been through, you know, like why are you bringing this up?" I think that's a really a great moment, and I think it's a very strong episode as well. It kind of ties. It's got a good ending, 6A. It really kind of. I mean, we'll talk about this afterwards, but obviously the Phil stuff yeah, I think it's got a pretty good final shot too, with the kind of family gathered at Christmas.
no, I definitely think so. I actually believe that the Carmela stuff in this episode, where she goes on her spontaneous trip with Rose, is is maybe the best stuff of hers in the show. I don't know, apart from maybe Whitecaps, she's great in that.
Yeah,
But I think in terms of what she actually gets up to, it's without a doubt some of my favorite. It's kind of a philosophical getaway, isn't it? I mean, she goes to this European city um, with someone that she's very close to, and they have conversations and walk around. um, no, anyway, so she goes to this city that has this kind of almost it has an emotional intensity to it for her, and you can quite clearly see that Carmela's thinking a lot, about the past and the future, and clearly about life and death. I mean, she brings up the fact that they never really talked about what happened with Jackie Jr. And it's a good scene because the way that Ro deals with it is she just doesn't want to confront it. She's having a good time, and to be honest, I don't think it's something she ever really confronted, because I think if she properly thought about it, I'm sure she knows deep down that her son didn't die in the way that everyone said he did, and there's more to it because in that business, it's never what you're told. It is, and you see that comes across in her performance. And there's also a fantastic part where you can quite clearly see that Carmela's thinking a lot more about Adriana, as she does throughout the season. I think an episode or two before, she runs into Adriana's mum, who's
Yeah,
convinced
she's
that
kind of
Adriana's
like
dead.
haunted by her, right? Because
Yeah, haunted. I think is a great way of describing it. The fact that she literally has a dream where Adriana's out walking her dog by the Eiffel Tower, and someone comes up to her and says something like, "Someone is to tell your friend that she's dead." And this idea is clearly weighing on Carmela quite a lot. Of course, her husband is in the mafia. Anything could have happened. And it's interesting that as it looks like the show is leaning more and more and more towards the fact that Carmela is going to realize that Adriana's definitely dead and not just somewhere having run off. That something's going to happen, but the way that it all wraps up is a lot more surprising. She kind of just doesn't. She comes to the realization that Christopher can't have killed Adriana, and that happens a lot later on in the season because of other reasons. But mostly, it's just nice to have a lot of amazing shots as they walk through a really beautiful city, having deep conversations. Carmela's obviously thinking about a lot of things, and again, her performance always encapsulates that very well. I think she's great, Edie, in this show. Really great.
yeah, definitely. I'm
Mm.
realizing that season 6A and 6B are going to be separate podcasts because there's so much to
Yeah.
say. But there's no trouble with that. Is there any other kind
Mm.
of episodes or moments from 6A that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, there's still. I think there are still a couple. I do want to say that that Christopher just gets married out of the blue. Well, he doesn't get married, but he proposes out of the blue to a woman that we hadn't seen before the scene where he proposes. So it's obviously um, complex Adriana issues are almost certainly coming to light here, where he doesn't seem to be coping well. His solution is to just try and move on the best he can by getting involved with someone he's only just met. Um, and and so there's that. And also, I think probably the biggest moment of the last few episodes is probably Vito's death, because we did talk about how he eventually comes back, and in that typical almost you know uh, fateful karma kind of way, when Vito comes up with a solution that works with him and Tony, where Tony says, where Vito proposes, look, I'll work for you. I'm a good earner. You know this. Just set me up somewhere. In like I think Atlantic City, he suggests, or somewhere not nearby, so he doesn't have to interact with the guys on a day-to-day basis. And Tony seriously considers it. I think, even though the implications of it would be terrible between him and Frank Vincent, Phil Leotardo. And there's a there's a really good scene where Vito is out with his family and he's talking to them about how things are going to improve. He's come back. He's not going to go away again. And I think in the next scene or a couple of scenes later, Phil gets the drop on him in a way that you don't anticipate. It comes out of nowhere. It's quite a shock. Because you thought that Vito would be quite well protected at this point. He wouldn't make stupid mistakes, but Phil catches him off guard and he kills him. And it's a really really brutal, really upsetting final scene for Vito. That it all comes down to this when, as hard as it would have been, he should have stayed in New Hampshire and not come back.
Yeah, definitely. It is kind of it is really hard, and it's sad, and it is going to act as a catalyst. But then you have the kind of Phil kind of being like hospitalized and almost dying. That kind of, even though it feels like it's exploding, it kind of gets put on pause for a little bit. You kind of you have him and Phil kind of reaching an understanding that isn't going to last very long. and I think it's like 1 or 2 episodes before Chicken Town in 6B, and then it kind of
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
feel like you're at the end of the show. But yeah, it leaves you in a really interesting place. I'm not the biggest fan of the Christopher stuff. I think it does feel quite rushed. I enjoy Cleaver. I enjoy kind of his and Tony's relationship in the season, but I think I mean it is rushed, and that's why it's not developed that much. But I don't know. I think maybe they could have done it better. Maybe it was always meant to be very rushed. But that relationship stuff and the kind of like love triangle with Tony, like that kind of episode and a half or whatever. It's not my favorite stuff in the show, especially when it's kind of when you've got things like Carmela going to Paris and her relationship with her friend and AJ. There's just better stuff, I think, happening in this season.
I understand that. I think the episode before Christopher dies, spoiler, is really great for putting you in his head. Maybe the best the show's ever done before killing him off, for me anyway, personally. I thought it was a great final episode with him. But we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
So I think around now it is maybe a little bit it might not be as smooth as other stuff that happens in the show. But I don't mind. I kind of like it because it is rushed and we've never met this character before. But it says so much about Christopher. I think you don't need to be a genius to understand what he's trying to cover up for, what he's trying to escape from in having proposed to this person who wants to try and fix his life back up together in the most poorly shoddily way possible. But it's still something that he wants to do, despite how difficult it might be, and that's why I like him having proposed. But I am also glad that I didn't see Chicken Town before I properly started watching the show, because if he's just there with this woman that I've never seen before and not Adriana, something's up. Something's definitely up here.
just a couple of final things before we wrap up. Just a couple of like things I wanted to mention. In the Paris stuff, you were kind of mentioning how Carmela is so kind of impacted by being in Paris. And I think it draws an interesting kind of parallel between a place that has history and America. Living in kind of suburban New Jersey, there is no culture, really. There is no history. America is in the modern sense, is such a recent country,
Yeah,
and everything is artificial. The houses in New Jersey are massive, but they are built and then destroyed within years. They aren't built to last. So kind of contrasting Carmela's kind of artificial kind of hypocrisy-filled life of luxury, and also kind of alienation in the fact that she has to live with the fact that her husband is a murderer and a criminal. And I think it's interesting for her to go to a place like with genuine history and genuine kind of a culture, and just kind of, and I think that's a really interesting change in setting, which kind of leads to the kind of conversations we were talking about. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention about that. And the other scene in terms of Tony and Christopher's relationship is you get a flashback, which is something the show doesn't do often, to the moment in which Christopher came to Tony when he found out that Adriana was kind of a rat. And I think
yeah,
this
I
is a really
remember.
interesting decision. In long-term parking, I think it's very effective the way it's displayed. That it's her and Christopher talking. Christopher goes away, and it's Tony kind of saying, "Oh, Christopher's tried to kill himself," which you and her don't really believe, but you want to, and that's why it's so effective when you see her kind of driving away, and then she's in the car with Sylvia. But I also think that we were robbed of this fantastic scene, this emotional scene between these two characters. So I'm glad they put it back in. I think it probably was filmed for season 6.
Do you really? I was just about to
But
ask you.
I'm
Do you really
curious.
think that's the
Yeah,
case?
I am curious. I'd have to go and look at what the characters look like to see kind of like when they would have filmed it, because I think maybe they had it in and they realized it worked better if they took the scene out. And maybe that's the case, and they're reusing it, which I'm glad about. but I'm glad we got to see it regardless. And I just think it's an interesting thing that either they took it out because it worked better without it, which is fascinating, or they decided we have to go back and shoot this because it's such a pivotal moment in these characters. So yeah, I just wanted to call out that scene.
Yeah, yeah. Were you going to ask me a question, by the way, a second ago? Or because it sounded like you said I'd be interested to ask something, something, something.
I think it's just that I'd
It sounded like you were gonna.
be interested to know.
Oh,
To
right.
know if
Okay. Okay.
you, I guess we'll never know if it when it was shot. We'll have to wait till they get there and talking Sopranos.
I was just about to say, yeah, yeah. I'm sure that if it was filmed in season 5, they would bring it up, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
Right.
I'd imagine with a show like this, it would be shot for season 6. I don't think they'd have shot something that pivotal and then not included it in the episode. I just don't think that's how the show is written or kind of produced.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I'm glad that we decided to do the structure of going through roughly episode by episode, so we could try and cover as much as we remember slash reading up on on the internet about the various subplots that some of which I kind of had slipped from my memory a little bit. I think it was a good idea.
Yeah, so should we say join us next time when we do 6B? And even though there's way less episodes, the podcast will probably be longer.
Yeah, because when it comes to the ending, we have to talk about how it symbolizes Tony waking up from for
All right, we'll see you next time.